This is my little revenge for a cheating wife. I watched my wife, Amy, whom I have been married to for 3 years, enter into an intimate relationship with a man named Reginald, whom she dated in the past. I was grateful for the wise decisions I made in the past. At that moment, I realized that I also needed to act wisely. Unfortunately, I didn't have a camera, as my phone was under repair, and I just saw that they were having an intimate relationship. To make matters worse, Amy and I were supposed to be at her father's house for dinner in less than an hour. I knew that as soon as I got the camera out, the opportunity to take a picture would disappear. But when Reginald's car blocked Amy's car, I saw a chance to take a little revenge. Carefully putting on gloves, I quickly loosened the valves on 3 of his tires, let the air out, and then closed the valves again. I grabbed a rubber hammer from the garage, hid behind a bush, and waited for Reginald to hurry out of the house. While he was swearing and kneeling near the right front wheel, I hit him with a rubber mallet, knocking him unconscious. I tried not to hit him too hard, just enough to knock him out. I quickly pulled the car keys out of Reginald's pocket and threw them into the depths of the nearby forest, using my skills as a former football player so that they would never be found. Then I pulled out his credit cards, driver's license, and a measly $28 in cash from his wallet, surprised that a rich man like him had so little money. Finally, I erased all traces from the crime scene. After washing the blood off the hammer with a cloth soaked in bleach, I returned it to the garage and put the cloth in a plastic bag along with my credit cards and license. Clutching the plastic bag in my hands, I hurried to my car, which I parked a few hundred yards from the house so that Reginald would not find me, and quickly drove towards my father-in-law's house. On the way, I passed a 7-Eleven store with one of the few remaining payphones in America. I parked at the nearest store. I took off my jacket, replacing it with a baseball cap, hoodie, and mirrored sunglasses, and headed for the phone. After giving a teenage girl $28 at the store, I asked her to anonymously call emergency services and report a man lying in the driveway of 15 Ridgeway Terrace. After throwing a plastic bag with a rag, credit cards, and a driver's license into a dumpster at the 7-Eleven store, I drove to my dear father-in-law, arriving 10 minutes earlier than the scheduled time. As you can see, I didn't like him very much. He liked me though, only because I was the best producer at his prestigious insurance company. In other words, he appreciated the profit I was making. My father-in-law, the rich and arrogant Chester Grimes, always thought Amy was too good to marry a middle-class man like me, named Blake Bristol. In fact, based on moral principles rather than wealth, I was too good for both Amy and Chester. Chester really appreciated punctuality, so I decided to call Amy on his landline and ask why she didn't show up at the appointed time. Amy looked worried and upset when she picked up the phone. "Hi, Amy. Where are you?" "Your father is starting to get a little annoyed," I said. Amy replied, "Well then, I'm sorry I'm late. A crime has occurred in front of our house, and the police are already here." Then she turned to the officer. "Yes, this is my husband, Blake, but I don't think you have anything to talk about with him." I heard Amy cover her phone with her hand during some argument in the background. Then there was the sound of handing the handset to someone else. "This is Detective Burns." "Is that Blake Bristol?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes, it's me, officer." "What happened? Is my wife okay?" I asked anxiously. "She's physically fine, Mr. Bristol, but a man named Reginald Swifton was attacked in your driveway and taken away in an ambulance. His car is being towed now," Detective Burns explained. Shocked, I asked, "What was Reginald Swifton doing in my house?" I screamed in anger, trying to make Chester Grimes hear me. "Your wife did not give us a clear explanation. Do you know anything about this?" "What the hell?" "He's her ex-boyfriend. Maybe he just stopped by for a while." "How should I know?" "I hope he got what he deserved." "No need for harsh language, Mr. Bristol." "So you don't know why he was at your house and who attacked him?" "No, but if you find this guy, tell him I'd like to buy him a beer," I asked Burns. "Could you take my wife to the hospital to get a swab and prove that Swift's DNA is present?" Burns replied, "I can't do this if she doesn't agree. I'm worried that she might have been abused and is too afraid to talk about it. Could you force her to go under such circumstances?" Burns explained, if she doesn't report the attack, I won't be able to force her, so take detailed photos to check for signs of an attack such as bruises or bleeding. Burns agreed to do it, and I thanked him for his help. Detective Burns, could you get Amy, the potential victim of the crime, on the phone again? I asked. Yes, although I'd rather talk to you tomorrow. Give me your number so we can get in touch. Call me to schedule an appointment, and I will come to you. I informed him, then dictated my mobile phone number. Hi, Blake, darling, Amy started to say, but then stopped. Stop talking nonsense, Amy. I want you to go to the hospital immediately. Detective Burns will take a vaginal swab test from you to determine if Reginald attacked you. Now, where did you get the idea, Blake? You have to prove to me that you didn't have intimacy with him. How can you accuse me of cheating at a time like this? Amy started crying. At a time like this, I replied, this jerk was attacked. I don't care about him, and you shouldn't care either. I shouted, pausing for effect. Listen, honey, either you take a swab in front of the police before you take a shower, or I'm filing for divorce. Go to hell, she shouted before I ended the conversation. Chester's face turned pale with anger. What the hell was that? Well, Chad, I replied, knowing that he hates being called Chad, your daughter cheated on me with Reginald Swifton, so I'm filing for divorce, I said, digesting the news. Chester hissed, you can't talk like that to me or about my daughter. I have to fire you. At that moment, the phone rang. I knew it was Amy calling, so I picked up the phone and put it down right away. Can you write this down for me? I asked impatiently, grabbing a pen and notebook from the kitchen counter and handing it to him. Despite the pain of not making money for people like you anymore, I can accept being fired, Chester continued to stutter, muttering about my lack of manners and ingratitude as he wrote, thanks, idiot. I muttered, leaving the room and holding my pink slip in my hands as the phone continued to ring in the background. I understand that my behavior may seem strange and incomprehensible, but hopefully, given the context, everything will become clear. The two important documents I mentioned earlier are the prenuptial agreement between Amy and me and the employment contract with Chester's company, signed at the same time. I convinced Amy and Chester to agree to a new provision in their contracts. I suggested making the prenuptial agreement reciprocal, that is, if one of them causes physical damage to the other or enters into an extramarital affair, the sanctions provided for in the prenuptial agreement will take effect. This meant that in my case, I would receive $500,000 from Amy's trust fund, and the rest of the property would be divided equally. In her case, she would have received 85% of the assets. Fortunately, we did not have children, but if they had appeared, the party found to be unfaithful would have lost custody. I never raised my hand against Amy in anger, and despite the many chances, I did not cheat on her. According to my employment contract, if I am fired or my earnings or responsibilities decrease by 10% or more, then the conditions of non-competition will cease to apply. Although I had no concrete evidence, I was unable to divorce Amy due to infidelity and receive what was owed to me under our prenuptial agreement. During the year, I had suspicions about her, and I collected a significant amount of circumstantial evidence. Even before the incident with Reginald, I had gathered circumstantial evidence of her infidelity. My friend and lawyer, Ron Botts, who also comes from the middle class, assured me that the evidence I have can be used in court and will work in my favor if the judge is chosen correctly. He also advised me on how to handle the divorce and what steps to take during the upcoming trial. He advised me not to close accounts, not to transfer money or securities, not to cancel credit cards, and so on until we receive a court order to register and freeze assets. Hasty actions may displease the judge and harm our case. After leaving Chester upset, I bought a disposable mobile phone and contacted Ron's office. Why are you still working at 7 o'clock on a Friday night? I asked. Ron jokingly replied, I provide services to helpless people like you. Then I explained the situation to him, starting from the moment I arrived at Chester's house. Ron gave me clear instructions. Instead of heading home that evening, he advised me to check into a hotel, save the checks, and make sure I was in the field of view of the surveillance cameras. The next morning, a private detective with a video camera had to accompany me home to leave a recording. Meanwhile, Ron will sort out the situation with Reginald and begin divorce proceedings on Monday. I followed his instructions, and the next morning, Saturday, the private investigator and I entered my house, the place where the incident with Reginald took place. The private investigator came in through the side door, and I entered through the front. I made a fuss and shouted, "Amy, I'm just here to get my stuff and leave." Amy hurried down the stairs, furious. "Who do you think you are, accusing me of cheating and forcing your father to fire you? You're just a bastard." I asked, "Did you remember to take an intimate swab?" "No way," she shouted before I interrupted her. "Well then, we have nothing more to discuss. I'll just take my clothes and leave." Amy was so focused on scolding me that she didn't notice the private investigator, but he managed to take clear photos and videos of her flawless face and skin, without cuts or bruises. I locked the bedroom door, ignoring her frantic banging and screaming, and quickly packed my things into 2 suitcases. I looked at the sheets, but she had already changed them, probably getting rid of the old ones without saying a word. I grabbed my suitcases and walked past her, heading for the exit. When I left, a private investigator filmed her screams and protests with a telephoto lens from the car. While Amy and I were upstairs, he discreetly installed a long-life voice recorder in the kitchen. As we were leaving, I asked about the quality of the photos and videos. "Perfect," he replied, noting that there were no visible marks on them. The decision to use a voice recorder turned out to be brilliant. That evening, we overheard a conversation between her and her friend, Lila Castle. Amy convinced Lila to physically hurt her, resulting in bruises on her face and arms as well as small cuts on her arms and neck. Having fulfilled Amy's request, Lila went with her to the clinic to fix the cuts and bruises and take photos. Meanwhile, the private investigator and I returned to my house to pack up the remaining things and pick up the recorder. As Ron predicted, on Monday, we filed a lawsuit for adultery, and by the end of the week, Amy filed a counterclaim for physical assault. On Monday, when Amy was handed the divorce papers, I visited Detective Burns. "Where were you during the Reginald Swifton incident, Mr. Bristol?" Burns asked after the first pleasantries. I replied with my arms crossed, "It looks like you suspect me." Burns replied, "We have evidence linking you to the scene of the incident." I replied, "Then you have to arrest me because I won't talk to you anymore, and I need a lawyer." I knew he had no proof. Burns warned, "Do you really want to do this? You will look guilty. When I asked for a lawyer, you had no right to ask me any more questions, but that's exactly what you did." "Either arrest me or I'm leaving," I said, getting up and heading for the door. "We'll be in touch," Burns said calmly, showing no signs of confrontation. "Only with my lawyer," I replied, handing him one of Ron's business cards before leaving the room. I didn't get any more messages from Burns, and neither did Ron. Looking back, I wish I had known about Ron's conversation with another private investigator, Dan Drake, during the filing of the lawsuit and counterclaim. Dan Drake was also a friend of Ron's. My concern would have been much less, and I would have better understood Ron's unwavering confidence in our business. The conversation between Ron and Dan took place 2 days after the counterclaim was filed. "Ron, I don't want you to reveal the details of what you know, but I have a few questions that need to be answered," Ron said. "Go ahead, Ron, I'll help if I can," Dan replied. "Dan, do you know the name Amy Bristol?" "Yes, something familiar," Dan confirmed. "Have you worked with clients who were interested in Amy Bristol's activities?" Ron asked. "Yes, I was working." Ron interrupted him, "Don't tell me anything else, Dan. Maybe one of the clients wants you to follow the divorce process with Amy Bristol." "All right, Ron. I'm sure at least one of them will be interested. I'll give you the date." "Thanks, Ron," he added and hung up. While this conversation was going on, I was discussing with Chester's main competitor the possibility of employment. To my surprise, I was immediately offered this position with a salary equal to what I earned at Chester and almost twice the commission. Having no restrictions, I quickly contacted my former clients, and within a week, most of them had transferred to my new employer. This success made it easy for me to cover the costs of Ron and the private investigator from the start of the divorce process to the date of the trial. I consistently outperformed Chester's company in attracting new clients, winning more than 80% of the cases by filing for divorce. Ron initiated an asset freeze, which was approved. This meant that neither Amy nor I could access our funds except to cover legal costs, payments authorized by the court, or special requests agreed upon by both parties or ordered by the court. No action was taken, such as cashing out CDs, canceling credit cards, transferring money from joint accounts to individual accounts, selling shares, canceling insurance policies, or auditing deposit boxes. Although the judge's decisions seemed unfavorable to me, Ron assured me that in the end, it would be beneficial for us. The case was handled by Judge Matt Moore, the youngest and newest judge in the family court. He was energetic, confident, and handsome, but I had suspicions that he was against us. I met Matt Moore only once at a 4th of July celebration at his neighbor's house, about a month before he was confirmed as a judge. This memory is related to the fact that I had a disagreement with Amy that night because she got drunk and left me alone. During our short conversation, Matt spoke fondly about my father-in-law, Chester Grimes. I asked Ron about our decision to forego a jury trial, expressing concern that Matt's relationship with Chester Grimes might lead to bias against us. Ron just smiled back, "Let's not overdo it. I have everything under control. I want to give you more than the prenuptial agreement requires," he said confidently. Then Ron started explaining the pre-trial process to me. He mentioned that at the disclosure stage, we will need to disclose all the evidence that we plan to use. The only exception is if we use something solely for the purpose of impeachment, to question the credibility of a witness or a party. In this case, we did not need to disclose either the evidence or the identity of the witness. Ron didn't mention his conversation with Dan Drake, and he didn't have any revealing information from that conversation. Amy's lawyer, Amanda McAfee, did not disclose this information during the investigation. When we received from Amy's lawyer the answers to the interrogations that Amy gave under oath, it was not surprising that Lila Castle was listed as a witness to the alleged assault on Amy. The attack allegedly took place on the Saturday after the incident with Reginald. When a private investigator and I entered my house to pack our things, Ron quickly noticed Lila's testimony before we could respond to Amy's requests for disclosure. Amy and I attended the videotaped testimony of Lila on Monday. Although we did not communicate with each other, Ron took the opportunity to ask Lila about the date of the alleged attack. "So, Miss Castle, you're sure you witnessed the attack before you escorted Mrs. Bristol to the clinic for treatment that Saturday, right?" Ron asked. Trying to look confident, Lila replied, "Yes, I'm sure." Then Ron asked, "You didn't hurt Mrs. Bristol yourself, did you?" Lila and Amy were stunned, and Amanda McAfee looked confused. "No way." Lila doubted. "I will show you an audio recording that, according to an unbiased witness, was made that Saturday after Mr. Bristol left his house. Let me know if you recognize the voices." When Ron pressed the play button, the faces around the table turned pale. When the recording ended, Ron asked, "Do you recognize the voices? Weren't you and Mrs. Bristol discussing how to frame Mr. Bristol so that he would attack you?" Lila burst into tears and said, "You must have set everything up." Ron assured her, "A voice expert will compare your voice on the tape with your testimony and send the case to the district attorney for perjury charges." I have no more questions. Amy's lawyer did not cross-examine her. 2 days after Lila's testimony, Amanda McAfee asked for the counterclaim to be withdrawn and demanded reconciliation from the court. She suggested suspending the case for 2 months so that the parties could find a certified mediator for reconciliation. Ron strongly objected to this motion, stating during the oral proceedings, their counterclaim was filed in bad faith, and we would like to be able to address this issue during the trial, as this will affect the credibility of Mrs. Bristol, and my client is not interested in reconciliation. Due to the fact that the case has been suspended, he loses interest on $500,000, which he wants to recover from Mrs. Bristol. Judge Moore, demonstrating bias, granted Amy's motion but offered a small concession. If the reconciliation does not take place and Mr. Bristol wins the court, Mrs. Bristol will be required to pay 2 months' interest at a rate of 4% per year on all funds owed to Mr. Bristol, in addition to the division of the inheritance. Ron reminded me to carefully follow the instructions in the correct order during the reconciliation procedure in order to avoid sanctions from the court. He advised me not to use swear words, no matter how great the temptation. Curious, I asked if the word *tch was considered a swear word. Ron grinned and replied that he didn't, but advised me not to use that word and instead call her a grossly unfaithful spouse. Just 2 days before the scheduled mediation session, I received a letter from Chester Grimes. I avoided his calls and texts. The letter contained an apology and an offer to reinstate me in my previous position with a significant increase in salary and commission. I saved it for possible proof but decided not to answer. Lawyers were not allowed to mediate, only interested persons. Amy looked amazing, immaculate outfit, makeup, and hairstyle. Despite my dislike of her, I couldn't help but notice her attractiveness and imagine another scenario with her. Due to the lack of a dress code in the order, I came in cut-off jeans, sandals, and a worn college t-shirt that Amy despised. She had already tried to throw it away twice. Besides, I hadn't shaved in 2 days, and my hair was unwashed and unkempt. Amy immediately realized that our relationship was doomed, but she continued to insist, probably guided only by considerations of $500,000. "Mr. Bristol, your appearance is very unexpected," the mediator remarked. "The order didn't specify a dress code, so I decided to show up like this," I replied. "I'm sorry if this doesn't meet your standards," I added, trying to keep my tone neutral, although I most likely failed. The mediator continued to explain the process while Amy and I were silent, even though we were the contenders. She let Amy speak first. "Shouldn't I be the first to act as a plaintiff?" I asked. "As an intermediary, I have the right to determine the order," she replied, clearly still annoyed by my presence. Amy seemed like a great actress. She expressed her love for me and asked why I doubted her. She recalled the wonderful moments of our life together and shed tears at the right moments to add drama. It took a good 30 minutes. Either the mediator was moved by Amy's words or he was trying to move the discussion forward. But as soon as Amy finished speaking, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Bristol, what can you say to your beloved wife who has just poured out her heart?" she asked. I replied, "She is not a beloved wife, she's a constant liar who betrayed my trust. She is a liar, as evidenced by her story that I beat her up. Her entire performance was a charade to save $500,000. I do not know if she ever really cared about me, but it does not matter to me. I don't love her, moreover, I hate her, and I want to get divorced as soon as possible in order to move on." The mediator and Amy were stunned. During the rest of the session, I sharply answered questions and statements from both the mediator and Amy. The only answer of more than 4 words I gave for the rest of the session was when a tearful Amy said, "You didn't even give me a chance to explain why Reginald was there before he flew into a rage." Then I explicitly told her, "I explicitly told you to take a swab to prove that you did not have intimacy with him or to accuse him of committing an intimate assault, and that if you did not do this, then I would divorce you. It was your choice." As a last desperate gesture, the mediator said, "Mr. Bristol, I want you to stand up, go up to Amy, and hug her. Maybe it will revive some feelings in you." I answered immediately, there was no reservation in the order that I should hug her. The thought of touching my ex-wife who cheated on me disgusts me. Politely refusing so as not to lose my composure, I watched as Amy abruptly stood up and cursed loudly at me. She seemed to be on the verge of physical aggression until an intermediary intervened to defuse the situation. Despite the mediator's attempts to calm Amy down, my smirk probably didn't help create a tense atmosphere. The mediator informed me that I could leave after informing the court that reconciliation was impossible. The court lifted the temporary ban and allowed the process to continue. Amy's lawyer took a statement from me, during which I answered all the questions truthfully, with the exception of those questions related to whether I had witnessed an intimate relationship between Mrs. Bristol and another man before filing for divorce, and whether Reginald Swifton was in my house when we were still married. Although I try to be honest, I decided to hide the truth in these matters. After several months of pre-trial procedures, during which Judge Moore demonstrated his bias at every opportunity while maintaining fairness with regard to possible appeals, the court was appointed for 2 months after the end of the disclosure phase. Ron decided not to question Amy for strategic reasons, but yet Amy's answers to questions in which she categorically denied having had sexual relations with another man while married and before filing for divorce. At the trial, we presented indirect evidence of infidelity. By 3 o'clock on the first day, despite Moore's bias, he knew that the satisfaction of the motion for conviction would most likely be overturned on appeal due to our weighty evidence. Now it was the defendant's turn to present his arguments, and Amy herself became the main witness. Amy swore under oath that she had never entered into an extramarital relationship. Although Judge Moore felt uncomfortable at times, he mostly favored Amy and rejected almost all of Ron's objections. When she finished testifying, it was almost 5 o'clock, and Judge Moore scheduled a cross-examination for the next morning. As we were gathering up our papers to leave, a man with a wide grin approached Ron. Ron greeted him with his smile. Although I noticed this man in the courtroom during Amy's testimony, I was not sure of his identity. "Blake, this is Dan Drake, my friend," Ron introduced. I shook Drake's hand, feeling confused. "I have some information for you, Ron," Drake said, smiling broadly. "This is about impeaching Amy Bristol's testimony." "Let's go to my office and order dinner," Ron chuckled as the three of us left. In Ron's office, Drake showed us a DVD on which a naked Amy brings James Watkins to a state of bliss when he calls her name. Drake mentioned that he had another DVD, but Ron wouldn't let him show it to us. "I need you to testify about the release date of the second DVD if that's what I suspect." At 9 o'clock the next morning, Ron began questioning Amy in court. He asked her about Reginald's visit on the day I witnessed their approachment and then asked, "Do you know a man named James Watkins?" Amy hesitantly confirmed, "Yes." "Do you know his wife, Jamie Watkins?" "Yes." "When did you first meet James Watkins?" "I don't remember exactly." "Wasn't it at your father's party 18 months ago when he came with his wife, Jamie? Didn't you move to the city just recently and start working for your father a month before?" "I suppose so." "Was it like that or not? Should I ask him or Mrs. Jamie Watkins to testify?" Ron snapped, and his friendliness disappeared after an awkward silence. Amy hesitated and finally said, "Yes, I remember now. I first met him at that party about 18 months ago." "So, you didn't know him before the wedding?" "No," Amy replied nervously. "Mrs. Bristol, have you ever had an intimate relationship with Mr. James Watkins?" Amy shook her head and replied, "No, no. You keep accusing me of cheating." After which, she burst into tears. "Your Honor, I would like to present the DVD as proof. I ask you to show it only on the monitors at the counsel tables, in the dock, and on the witness stand, but not on the main monitor of the courtroom," Ron explained. "BFF, please make sure that the necessary buttons are pressed to satisfy this request," the judge ordered after a short pause and a nod from the bailiff. Ron pressed the play button on the DVD player. A scream escaped Amy's lips, and she quickly covered her mouth with her hands. "From what she saw on the screen, is this a video of you and Mr. Watkins engaging in intimate activity, Mrs. Bristol?" Ron asked after the video had played for about a minute. "No, no, no. It's not real. Please turn it off," Amy cried, her voice breaking. "No more questions, Your Honor. If there are no objections, I would like to call Dan Drake to testify," Ron announced. Amanda McAfee replied, "No questions," and frowned when Amy, visibly upset, left the witness stand. "I have to express my disagreement with the use of this video since it was not provided to us during the judicial investigation and should not be used for any reason," said Amanda McAfee. "Your Honor, I only found out about its existence around 7 o'clock yesterday evening, but that fact doesn't matter. The DVD and the testimony of Mr. Dan Drake, who will confirm its authenticity, are intended solely to challenge Mrs. Bristol's testimony and for no other purpose," Ron argued. Despite the awkwardness, the judge had no choice but to allow it. "The protest has been rejected. If he is duly confirmed, I will attach the DVD solely for the purposes of impeachment," the judge declared. Dan Drake looked like a confident and collected witness. After Ron inquired about his credentials, he confirmed the authenticity of the DVD, stating that he recorded the video at the residence of Mr. and Mrs. Watkins with the consent of his client, Mrs. Jamie Watkins. He also clarified that in the video, James Watkins and Amy Bristol made love at a time when she was still married to Blake Bristol and before the divorce process began. The judge looked visibly agitated by this revelation. When Ron asked if Drake had another video of Mrs. Bristol making love to a married man when she was still married to Mr. Bristol, Drake readily confirmed, "Yes." "What is the date of this video, Mr. Drake?" "The 4th of July, 2012, Drake replied and turned to face Judge Moore. When we entered the office, Judge Moore took off his robe and sat down and thought. After a moment of silence, he began to address the group. Miss McAfee, it appears that your client, Mrs. Bristol, lied under oath, which could be considered perjury. I may have to report this to the authorities, and it may affect my opinion on the case. I will suspend the trial for 24 hours to give you the opportunity to negotiate a settlement. Otherwise, there may be consequences. Unless there are compelling reasons to present new evidence, this will be the next step. Amy and Amanda McAfee exchanged glances, both looking worried. I hereby announce that the testimony in this case has officially been completed. In addition, I am ready to consider a motion to close the protocol by 4 o'clock that afternoon. Amy had given me a check for $500,000 with interest, covered all Ron's expenses, and signed a document agreeing to the terms of the divorce. According to which, I received 60% of our assets instead of the 50% stipulated in the prenuptial agreement. The extra 10% was a personal bonus. In exchange, we made an agreement with prejudice. I agreed not to mention Amy's perjury to the district attorney, and instead, we filed for divorce together due to irreconcilable differences and the sealing of the protocol later that day. Judge Moore readily approved the settlement agreement, granted permission for the divorce, and sealed the protocol. That evening, Ron, several colleagues, Dan Drake, and even Jamie Watkins joined me for dinner to celebrate. As we toasted the successful conclusion of the case, I quietly asked Ron why Judge Moore was so determined to dismiss the case and seal the record. I don't have any concrete evidence of this, Ron replied with a grin. If I had any, I, as an employee of the court, would have to file an application for Moore's recusal and report it to the Ethics Commission. But I'm sure he had a personal interest in this case, Ron added, and his grin became even more sinister. I didn't have to ask a lot of questions, everything became clear anyway. A few months later, I learned that Judge Matt Moore and his wife, Elizabeth Moore, had divorced due to irreconcilable differences. The details were not disclosed, but I couldn't help but notice that Judge Moore was now seen driving a 5-year-old Ford. It was a stark contrast to the first time I met him at a 4th of July party in the year 2012, where he arrived in a brand new Mercedes. Story 2. On another note, it was a dark day for me. It was a particularly sad Friday when I anxiously waited for my life to begin to take shape in such a way that nothing would depend on it. All I could do at that moment was wait and see if the impending disaster would actually happen. But I refused to wallow in self-pity like a fool. I remembered the advice my old sergeant had given me a long time ago: action is the best defense. The only way out for me was to fight, if only to preserve my honor. Even if everything else collapsed, fortunately, the day before, I received valuable information that allowed me to prepare for what was to happen. I ended up in my friend's black Perso, hidden in a secluded spot in the motel parking lot. I was informed that my wife would arrive after lunch, and the anticipation of her pulling up in a red Toyota Yaris was both nervous and exciting. Of course, she arrived accompanied by her lover in his luxury BMW, which he parked next to her car. After exchanging a few words with her, he went to the registration service. I decided to leave my car and go to my wife's Toyota. I opened the passenger side door, got in, and handed my surprised wife a brown envelope. "What are you doing here, Billy?" "Stop it," she screamed. "I'm just delivering the divorce papers to my cheating future ex-wife," I replied calmly. "Enjoy your time with your noble real man. You can stay here forever, I don't care," she began to protest, insisting that I was wrong and that there was an explanation for everything. "It's not about cheating. I'm asking for a divorce, and I don't care that you're dating the man who just went to get the key to the room in your secret place. You're free to be with him, and I really don't care," I stated firmly. It was obvious that my wife, whom I once loved, was hoping for a more romantic evening with her lover as she began to cry loudly. Now, her supposed real man was returning with the key to the room, and when he saw Rebecca still crying in her car, opening the door on her side, he demanded to know who I was and what I had done to her. While he was talking, I got out of the car, holding a small plastic bottle in my hand. I heard her crying, telling me that I was her husband and that I was planning to divorce her because of their affair. My lover threatened to attack me, but I quickly took action. I aimed the bottle at his face, releasing a jet of water and shampoo that blinded him and made him scream with rage. Taking advantage of his temporary blindness, I took out a second weapon, a dart with 3 sharp tips attached to the head. With a quick movement, I stood behind him and drove the dart into his left buttock, with the barbed tip firmly fixed in place. By the way his eyes glittered and the way the dart pierced his buttock, I realized that my actions had been crowned with success. I left the unhappy lovers behind, and my husband to deal with the consequences of his actions. I drove out of the motel parking lot, leaving behind my cheating wife who was crying loudly in the car. She was sitting there like a lost soul, and I was swearing like a sailor. No matter what happened that Friday, one thing was clear: there would be no romantic reconciliation between us. My name is Billy Svensson, a 37-year-old Scandinavian man currently tied the knot with 36-year-old Rebecca. Our 2 children are the only thing that connects us now. Na and Estelle, who are 7 years old, are my and Rebecca's children. We have been together for 11 years, and 10 of them are married. Despite the fact that we have everything that most couples in our position dream of, we are not as happy as we should be. In my opinion, the main reason for our unhappiness is Rebecca's mother. Despite the fact that she has neither green skin nor a tail nor the ability to spit fire, she behaves like a hostile dragon, constantly causing me trouble. It all started the day I met her. I was invited to dinner at Rebecca's house, but instead of a pleasant evening, it was more like a roasting session. The dragon, as I had already thought about her, bombarded me with questions and made it clear that she did not approve of my name, Billy. According to her, names like Billy, Kenny, Ronnie, Molly, Nellie, and Cindy are not suitable for upper-class families. I couldn't resist sarcastically thanking her for her insight. What surprised me even more was that neither Rebecca nor her spineless father stood up for me while she continued her tirade. She criticized my surname, Svensson, calling it a typical farmer surname that has passed down from father to son. Then she had the audacity to compare me to Rebecca's sister's fiancé, a man from a noble family. Fed up with her arrogance, I stood up and bluntly stated that the man's father was rumored to come from some distant branch of this noble family. Is he just an unemployed parasite on the social security system? I asked before anyone could answer. I need some fresh air, I continued, turning to Rebecca. To my surprise, she agreed to join me as we left this place that looked like a dragon's nest. I've known Natalie's boyfriend, Alexander, since high school and wasn't shocked that he managed to manipulate Rebecca's eccentric mother and make her think he was perfect for Natalie. It didn't concern me, so why should I care? I wasn't invited to Natalie and Alexander's lavish wedding, but I didn't care. The relationship between Rebecca and me was important to me, which blossomed until it unexpectedly led to her pregnancy. When her furious mother called me to express her disapproval and brand me a scumbag in the eyes of decent people, I didn't care. All hopes of a wedding at her expense were quickly dispelled. The Scandinavian Church of Los Cristianos in the Spanish Canary Islands was out of the question. Tenerife was a popular place for intimate weddings, so Rebecca and I decided to tie the knot there with our best friend next to us. We both got good jobs in a city located 200 kilometers from our hometown, which led to minimal communication with Rebecca's mother, who focused all her attention and resources on Natalie and Alexander. Despite this, the following years were kind to us. We built a happy life with our 2 children, made a living, bought a beautiful house, and established strong relationships in a new society. Our intimate relationship remained unchanged due to the distance. My communication with Rebecca's family was limited, her parents never came to us, and we visited our families only in our hometowns. In the end, even Alexander got tired of his domineering mother-in-law. He succeeded at work and accepted a promotion that required moving 280 kilometers away. After a tense conversation with Natalie, he gave her an ultimatum: accept the distance or end the marriage. She accompanied him to his new job. Suddenly, my mother-in-law remembered that she had a daughter named Rebecca and started calling often. Over time, these calls inexplicably led to Rebecca treating me more and more distantly. Conversations mostly boiled down to endless complaints about my actions, inaction, and responsibilities, as well as exaggerated stories about the successes of Natalie and Alexander. When I told Rebecca that Alexander had moved to escape from a hostile dragon mother-in-law, our relationship did not improve, the situation only worsened. When a new guy from a noble family came to work for her, Rebecca quickly began to idolize him, calling him either Superman or a real man. He was married to a nurse who worked in Africa, and although they planned to buy a house after her return, he was currently renting a room in the city from his wife's sister. Rebecca constantly compared me to this new man, criticizing everything from my actions to my clothes. It was obvious who she favored in these comparisons. Despite this, we still maintained a physical relationship, although my attempts were often met with disparaging remarks. If it weren't for our children and Rebecca's positive qualities, I would have ended the relationship a long time ago. She was a loyal, great mother, knew how to cook in the kitchen, took good care of her appearance, and we were a good team in putting the house in order and taking care of the garden. If only she hadn't started constantly picking on me and making negative remarks, she would still be the perfect wife in my eyes. I admit that I made a mistake by not being able to stand up for myself and express my thoughts, which only added fuel to the fire of our problems. One evening, after our children had fallen asleep, Rebecca turned to me and said, "I would like you to be like my colleague. If you love this lying jerk, why don't you file for divorce and be free to become his woman? But as long as we're married, I'll never tolerate infidelity. If you dare betray me behind my back, rest assured I will make you pay dearly for your actions." Then Rebecca started shouting angrily, calling me names and demanding an explanation about my alleged betrayal. She was outraged when I called her a hypocrite and made it clear that I would pay for my words. I pointed out the irony in her accusations, reminding her that her clients were actually paying while we were arguing. 2 frightened children came up to us, and I quickly turned my attention to calming them down. 2 icy weeks passed after our confrontation before any semblance of normalcy returned. During visits to relatives and friends, Rebecca behaved politely, but as soon as they left, her facade crumbled. When we said goodbye to them, she warned, "Don't count on my services." The following Thursday, chaos ensued when Rebecca's colleague called me at work and quickly got down to business. She explained that a new charismatic man had joined their team, and 3 women, including my wife, were claiming his attention. Despite our pleas not to interfere, she insisted on pursuing him, despite being happily married to me. Now, she proudly brags that she won the competition and plans to go to the motel with him tomorrow afternoon. I expressed my gratitude to her and asked her to keep our phone conversation a secret so that I could solve our problem. When I got home from work, I noticed that Rebecca was acting more cheerful than usual. The phone call brought back memories of an old sergeant from my time in the Army who admired the tactics of Apache warriors in Arizona, surprise attack and then disappear. Having no experience of street fighting, I knew that my only chance of success was to imitate these ancient warriors. Rebecca had mentioned that her companion had a black belt in Japanese martial arts, so catching him off guard was extremely important. Pepper spray is not sold in this country, so I improvised with a mixture of shampoo and water in a small plastic bottle. After a painful ordeal before my own eyes, I realized that this homemade weapon would serve its purpose. The sergeant told stories about silent arrows that were used in ambushes during the border wars in Arizona. Their barbed tips instilled fear in enemy soldiers. Although I couldn't use a bow and arrow against Rebecca's lover, this idea gave birth to a plan in my head. I went to my basement workshop and made a homemade weapon out of a dart, soldering sewing needles to it to create a barbed tip. I was hoping that the barbed tip would be difficult to remove without medical intervention. I wasn't going to try it on myself. Having come up with a simple plan, I decided that by handing Rebecca the divorce papers and momentarily blinding her lover, I would get the opportunity to strike a well-aimed dart into his buttock, which would undoubtedly put an end to any romantic endeavors of my wife. I strongly doubted that, with a dart in his buttock, he would be set up for anything other than seeking medical help. The next morning, I put my plan into action. Rebecca was wearing a provocative dress, but I chose not to pay attention to it and refrained from commenting. We both continued to go about our usual business on a typical Friday morning at work. I swapped cars with my friend Eric, as we often did when he needed a larger car. I spent the morning at the courthouse getting the divorce forms and filled them out in my office. After a thorough search, I managed to contact the main office of a humanitarian organization in Tanzania and get the email address of Rebecca's lover's wife. During my lunch break, I went into Rebecca's office and noticed that both her car and her lover's car were still parked in the parking lot, indicating that they had gone to a nearby restaurant for lunch before heading to the motel. I bought some hot dogs and waited for them at the motel. As expected, the lovers arrived, and my plan was successfully implemented. My Army experience turned out to be valuable, and I was grateful to the old sergeant for his guidance. At 3:30 p.m., The home phone rang, and a female voice, familiar from yesterday's call, asked if I had visited the motel as planned. Despite the hostility of my wife's colleagues, I tried to cheer her up by filing for divorce, which only led to further conflict. The man from the motel even threatened me with physical violence. I found myself in a situation where I had to defend myself, and as a result, he suffered several injuries to his buttock. I suppose my wife should have taken him to the hospital. It wasn't exactly a romantic evening, at least from my point of view. I told her about it. "Is that really how it was?" "What is it?" she asked. "Yes, it is." "I have no reason to deceive you," I replied. "My wife is not at home right now, but you can call her on her mobile and ask, although I can't guarantee that she will tell you the whole truth," I added. She thanked me and asked for Rebecca's mobile phone number, which I provided. I hope they had a pleasant conversation after that. I sent an email to the man's wife in Africa, explaining the whole situation. By 4 o'clock, Rebecca had already returned home, visibly unhappy. She looked at me and said, "We need to talk right now." It was clear that she was unhappy. "It's not a problem for me," I replied. "You and your lover got what you wanted. You must be completely crazy if you expected me to be a fool and endure this humiliation. I will never accept the idea of being your so-called real man, Rebecca." "I refuse to tolerate such disrespect without defending my dignity," I said. Although he did not cause her any harm, the injury was so serious that I had to rush him to the emergency room at the hospital. "Rest assured, you will answer for your actions. In fact, all 4 adults and 2 children in our group will share responsibility for the bill caused by your actions and those of your accomplice." It is absurd to think that a nurse in Africa would be pleased to receive my letter detailing your behavior. Realizing this became a difficult ordeal for her when she found out the truth about her husband's infidelity. The man she thought she knew turned out to be an unscrupulous, traitorous scoundrel. Anger and pain overwhelmed her as she rushed to me with her fists, demanding to explain how he could betray her in such a cruel way. "I didn't threaten you with anything," I replied coldly, persuading her to just sign the divorce papers so that they could part without problems. In fairness, I warned her that going to a lawyer would only lead to more suffering and expense, and the result would be the same. When my words reached her, she realized the gravity of the situation. Tears flowed down her face as she realized the reality of betrayal and the painfulness of the path ahead. "Oh my God, are you really serious right now? Please just listen to me. I swear I didn't do anything wrong. But by blindly following your mother's revenge against me just because I don't belong to the upper class, you let her turn you into a grumpy and vicious person towards me. It's obvious that you admire a colleague who you think is superior to me in every way, as you keep telling me. And now I found out that you are competing with 2 single colleagues for the opportunity to go on a date with this supposedly real man. After winning this ridiculous game, you decided to leave work early today to pick up your prize at the motel. Unfortunately, it also meant that you betrayed me by having an affair with a married man. You know how acutely I feel about infidelity, so your actions are bound to have consequences." Unable to hold back the tears, she continued, "I have never cheated on you, not today, not ever. You're the only man I love. Don't forget that we have 2 children. What about them? Our children are the only reason I didn't kick you out for your constant nagging. I was constantly criticized by both your mother and you, pointing out all my flaws and making me feel inferior compared to the other man you were dating. Because of your infidelity, I felt humiliated and tired of enduring your constant insults. In the end, we both came to the realization that our relationship could not be restored and began discussing the terms of our divorce, agreeing to continue living in the house and remain faithful during the divorce process." Rebecca signed the papers, but just 6 weeks after she prevented an attempted betrayal, my marriage took an unexpected turn. Rebecca had turned into a kind and loving wife, a stark contrast to the woman who once treated me badly. We now treat each other cordially and respectfully as we go through this new chapter in our relationship. We are working more closely together now than in the months when our problems became known. It's true that we no longer share a bed and a bedroom. I can honestly say that I do not miss the hasty intimacy that we had at that time before her betrayal. It may sound silly, but I prefer to believe her when she insists that she has never slept with her other partner. The date at the motel was supposed to mark the beginning of their relationship, which was interspersed with physical intimacy from time to time. The man's wife insisted that he go to Tanzania and volunteer at an aid camp until her own commitments were over. He agreed in the hope of saving their marriage. After his departure, my wife contacted me by email, assuring me that he was fine and that she had forgiven him. She even begged me to forgive Rebecca, but I do not know what to do because there is still a lot of time before our divorce process. One can only wonder if Rebecca really aspires to be a good wife and how long she will be able to maintain this facade. Story 3. I usually work 30 minutes from my hometown and rarely had the opportunity to be home during the day unless the job required it. But that Wednesday morning was a rare exception. Around 10 o'clock, I finished my work and decided to drop by my house, although I did not expect anyone to be there. Lisa and Elmer, my children, were supposed to be at school, and my wife Monica used to spend 2 hours at the gym every Wednesday morning before starting her job at the fashion store at noon. Therefore, it was a bit of a shock for me to see a silver metallic Volvo at our entrance. Monica didn't talk about any visitors, and it was unusual for her to skip weekly gym classes. The sight of the V70 aroused my curiosity, as it was the most common car in our area and did not give any hints as to who might be its owner. Our car registry is a nationwide database that allows you to get information about the owner of a car using a mobile phone. By sending a text message with the car number to the registry, you can get the name and address of the owner within a few seconds. I was intrigued by the response I received from the registry, as it followed that the car belonged to Paris Fashion AB, the store where Monica worked. The store was run by Alina Alfredson and Eric Alfredson, who were about 40 years old. Eric was infamous for his ability to climb the career ladder and gain influence. I hardly knew any of them, as I had never participated in their social gatherings. Why were they in my house so early in the morning? If Alina was there, then there was a serious reason for it, most likely related to Eric. I started to worry that it might be something negative given the rumors circulating around him, but I did not lose hope that there was a plausible and innocent explanation for their unexpected visit. I prepared for any scenario by making sure that my phone's 5-megapixel camera was ready to work, although I didn't expect that I would need it. Sneaking into the house, I found that the kitchen and living room were empty. My heart started pounding when I heard muffled sounds in the distance. As I approached the closed bedroom door, I heard a woman's voice, most likely Monica's. Wasting no time, I got my cell phone camera ready, opened the door, and carefully stepped inside. Monica and Eric turned their heads in surprise as I went to the bed and quickly took a picture with the flash on my phone. Without hesitation, I pounced on Eric, striking him with a series of powerful blows to the face. It seems like you're providing a passage that needs some adjustments. To ensure it aligns with community guidelines, I'll make some revisions. How about this? After I knocked him to the floor, Monica's screams filled the room. I shouted at her to quiet down. Eric didn't resist when I undressed him and escorted him outside next to his car. Returning to the house, I tossed his clothes at him, angrily warning, "If you don't leave my property within the next 30 seconds, I'll have to physically remove you." I warned him, and he quickly disappeared, probably without bothering to get dressed. Then I told Monica to leave, get dressed, and not come back until the next day. I also informed her that the children would stay with her parents, and I would take them there after school. When Monica was about to leave, she tried to explain that everything was not as it seemed, and that I was her only true love. I raised my voice again, calling her to silence, and after a few moments, she obeyed and left the room. After that, my memories are hazy, as if I had suffered a severe shock. Despite this, I clearly remember contacting my employer to explain the situation and ensure my return to work on Monday. I also contacted Eric's wife, informing her of the disturbing discovery that her husband was in bed with my wife. I distinctly remember her reaction, filled with expletives reminiscent of a seasoned dock worker. After that, I ordered the largest garbage container to be delivered to my lawn. Then, I took all of Monica's clothes and personal belongings to the garage. I also collected a few leftover things that she brought with her when we first moved in together, as well as gifts from her parents and other relatives during our marriage. All these things were laid out on a plastic tarp on the garage floor. Finally, with the help of an electric chainsaw, I destroyed the expensive bed on which Monica betrayed me. After that, I started destroying all the furniture in the house except for the children's rooms, which I left untouched. I grabbed the container and began throwing everything that was left in the cupboards into it, filling it with broken furniture. It was an expensive container because Monica always preferred to buy high-quality things, but right now, I didn't care about the cost of lost things because losing a marriage seemed like a much bigger loss to me. I contacted a friend who had a summer house near the city that his family rarely used. I explained what had happened and rented the house until I found a more permanent place to live in the city where I worked. During the lunch break, I gained access to our shared bank accounts and divided the funds equally. When everything except my clothes and personal belongings had been taken out, I started cleaning the house. In the evening, I began working in my still untouched home office, uploading photos of Monica and Eric to my computer. In the picture, they are captured from different angles, both looking directly into the camera. There was no mistaking who was in the picture. I was aware of Eric's political ambitions at the local and district levels, including his desire to become a prominent figure in his political party. Politicians often seek publicity, so by sending a photo of Eric and Monica engaged in intimate activities to local politicians whose contact details I could find, he undoubtedly received a significant amount of publicity. There was a caption attached to the photo with a detailed description of her character, and I even printed out several copies of the picture. Monica called me several times during the day, but every time I answered, I made it clear that we had nothing to discuss at the moment. To my surprise, the police did not arrive as I had expected, which indicates that Eric did not report our fight. I spent the night in my son's room, and in the morning, when I saw the mess I had made in anger and shock, I felt regret. It is not surprising that Vikings were feared in the coastal areas of Europe, but I thought it was better to be a fierce warrior than a fool when faced with infidelity. When I was reading the morning paper, the headline caught my eye: "Naked Man in Car Accident." The article described how a naked man collided with a garbage truck and was injured, despite the fact that the airbags saved him from the worst. One thing I knew for sure: no one could accuse me of involvement in this incident. And I also knew that there was even more drama ahead of me. The newspapers were full of scandals, especially those related to a famous politician. When Monica returned home at 10 o'clock in the morning, she was shocked to see a container on the lawn in an almost empty house. She screamed for several minutes before finally asking me, "What have you done?" I replied, "What have I done? What did you do? You ruined our marriage, and I've dealt with the remnants of it. Your things are in the garage. Please take them away before the house is sold." She was screaming, "Do you even care what happened to Eric or that I lost my job? Don't put the blame on me. Is it my fault that Eric and you ruined our marriage and your career?" There was no response. Instead, she strode through the house, realizing the seriousness of her infidelity, and let out a piercing scream. She then contacted the authorities and waited for the police to arrive. On the street, 2 young policewomen approached me and asked for permission to search the house. I granted it, and they inquired about Monica's belongings. Afterward, they spent some time in the house and garage. As they prepared to leave, they expressed sympathy for Monica, although they admitted that my reaction was excessive. Monica angrily swore at me and ran out of the house, taking our children to her parents' home. The next day, I contacted her parents to arrange a meeting at the cafe to discuss the situation, as Monica refused to talk to me. We couldn't change the past, so we decided to focus on the future. I have always had a good relationship with Monica's parents, so I honestly told them about my plans to move closer to work. I wanted the children to stay at their current school and remain close to their friends, so I offered Monica full custody. My only request was to see the children every weekend, on special occasions, and during joint holidays. Monica's parents agreed that it was important for the children to have a strong bond with their father. They even offered to help Monica buy our house from me. Monica was surprised at how well the negotiations went and agreed to meet with me to discuss the details. We met at the same cafe where I talked to her parents, and although we both knew there was no turning back, we focused on finding solutions for the future. We came to an agreement about the kids, and she mentioned that she and her parents were going to buy me out of the house. With the help of his contacts, my boss found me a wonderful apartment with a good location, which I moved into in just a month. One Friday, when I was without children, my colleague Anna invited me to dinner with her and her husband, Ralph. To my delight, they also invited Ralph's recently divorced sister, Eliza. Eliza, a younger and amazingly sociable woman, and I had a great evening together. The next morning, we agreed to go to a large shopping center in the capital of the district. The trip was a success, and Eliza's 5-year-old daughter, Helen, and I quickly became friends. Later in the evening, Eliza and I decided to cook dinner at her house together. The three of us had a great time in the kitchen. When we sat down to eat, Helen looked at me and asked bluntly, "Do you want to marry my mom?" Caught off guard, I hesitated before answering. "I wish I could, but your mom needs to think about it first. Are you considering this?" Eliza smiled at both of us and replied, "Oh yes, I promise to think about it seriously." Later in the evening, when Lena was sleeping in her room, Eliza and I shared a moment of intimacy on the couch. She mentioned that Helen really wanted me to marry her because her father was already living with his new girlfriend, and she thought I was the right choice. I kissed Eliza and assured her that I would do my best to keep my promise to Helen. To my surprise, Eliza offered to stay the night if I promised to behave like a good guy. Although I didn't quite understand what she meant, I agreed. I decided not to rush things and act only as it would be convenient for her. I kissed her. She met my gaze and asked, "Are you serious, or are you just trying to charm me?" I assured her, "I swear, I take every word seriously." She held my gaze and confessed, "I believe you, and I care about you too, but isn't it a bit forward to say such things on our first date?" I couldn't believe how quickly it happened, but the truth is, I fell for you. She didn't resist as we grew closer, but made it clear that she preferred to prioritize safety. We didn't discuss unprotected intimacy. She wasn't on birth control, and I hadn't brought contraceptives. As we undressed, I guided her to the bedroom, respecting her boundaries. Eliza was worried that I would see her as just a cheap fling, and it would all end. So, I tried to assure her of my true feelings for her. The next day, I treated Eliza and Helen to dinner at a popular restaurant, and it seemed to me that we had become a real family. When I returned to work on Monday, my colleagues noticed my enthusiasm and asked a lot of questions about the weekend, which clearly indicated that they were unforgettable. Initially, Anna's dinner was supposed to cheer up the oppressed person, but it turned out to be a pleasant surprise for all participants. Eric Alfredson was abandoned by his wife and political associates after the scandal, which forced him to leave the city. Meanwhile, Monica took care of their house and got a new job in the office while simultaneously exploring online dating options. Although I don't know him, my children speak very well of him. I'm pleased to see that Lisa, Elmer, Eliza, and Helen get along well with each other. Eliza and I are planning a wedding, and she even mentioned the possibility of starting a family. Our relationship is strong, and now we are looking for a house in a good area. Most people have ups and downs in their lives, but at the moment, everything is going great for Eliza, our children, our past, and me.